Welcome back to Purrfect Takes. I'm your host, Stephen Patton, joined as always by my dear friend and co-host, Jacob, who, believe it or not, is celebrating a birthday today. So happy birthday, Jacob. It is a fun time to talk about football. Anything special? Got any good gifts?
Well, I wouldn't say it's a fun time to talk about Panthers football, so to speak, but it's always a good day. Your birthday is always a good day. Treating myself, get the ice or sparkling ice instead of the regular water today. So had a donut. I got a donut after I went to the gym this morning. So it's been a good day so far.
Krispy Kreme, or was it like
No,
one of the cake ones
from Harris Teeter, the one from Harris Teeter. Yeah.
Nice, very nice. Jelly filled, just the regular frosting.
Frosted with Panthers colored sprinkles, actually. It had blue and black sprinkles.
Awesome. Well, speaking of Panthers, they took another loss this week, 26-3 loss to the Los Chargers. Game started off poorly. There was a face mask on the opening kickoff, and it was all downhill from there. We allowed 219 yards on the ground. J.K. Dobbins absolutely feasted behind the offensive line that the Chargers have built over the past couple off seasons. What were some of the key takeaways you gained before we get into obviously Bryce being benched and some of the Canales news that has come out over the past day?
Well, it was just more of the same from week one, right? When we did our pod after week one, I kind of wanted to stress that, hey, it's week one. I'm not going to go super crazy. I'm not going to trip off of a week one blowout. And it makes me feel a little bit better seeing as how the Cowboys met the same fate as us, at least defensively, when the Saints shellacked them in AT&T Stadium. But then this week happens, and while it's not what was the total score? 47-10 that first game, I think was the score. It was still pretty bad. Bryce Young, completely unplayable. Just had a really rough game. Another turnover, no passing touchdowns, no rushing touchdown this time, and just it's just missing stuff. He looks lost out there. Some of the play calling, I think, is still an issue. And then defensively, while we did get some movement, some pressure on Herbert in the past game, we even had a strip sack from Jaden Peavy, one of the young interior guys there replacing Derek Brown. It was just a feast for them on the ground. Like you said, 219 yards rushing. To date, we're allowing 199.5 yards rushing per game, so 399 total. And it's all just horrible. Like you said, all three phases, it's bad. From the start of the game with the face mask, you just knew you're like, great, it's going to be one of those days. And it was one of those days.
Well, it was one of those days when the end of the first drive for the Chargers ended in a Quentin Johnston touchdown catch. I mean, J.C. Horn was on his hip, but that's where if you are an elite cornerback, you get your hand in there and you break it up at the very least, because it's not like Quentin Johnston caught the ball with his hands on either touchdown catch in this game. He caught it with his body. And so just to not be able to break that up, when you look at the coverage too, it looked like they were playing like a cover four, like deep, because they had four guys that J.C. Horn and Quentin Johnston kind of go by back in the secondary, and you don't have like a safety help. And so I don't know what Evero was calling there. It was a 3rd and 10. You would expect at least somebody there to kind of give Horn some help on that deep ball. Justin Herbert obviously makes a great play. It's hard to kind of wrap your mind around what's going on between not only Bryce Young looking unplayable, between the Denzel Perryman sack he took, and just always seeming to check the ball down instead of trying to force the issue and get the ball downfield. And it just became very apparent. Now, what I will say is Xavier Legette. It was early on in the second quarter, but they pretty much had four guys out to the left side. Miles Sanders, it was a running back screen. Bryce Young thought it was a zero look, and Chase Daniel did a great job at breaking this down and showing that Bryce Young needed to use some cadence to see if the defense was in zone or man coverage. And the reason why Bryce Young thought it was cover zero, it was a 3rd and long, and typically defenses play man coverage on 3rd down. And instead of just going on what you're seeing and trying to get the defense to move, you're going off tendencies. And that's where Bryce made the mistake. Now, on that play, Xavier Legette literally lets the cornerback walk by him to make the tackle on Miles Sanders. But it's one of those things that just nothing is being executed from the quarterback making the decisions in the pocket to the wide receivers on the field. And I know a lot of people are going to point to the wide open Thielen at the end of the game, But it was 20-3 at that point, and it was a third down, and Bryce Young is rolling out to the opposite side. To make a throw of that caliber, unless it's in stride, is very hard to do. So it's just very frustrating to see people go, oh, when you turn on the film, Bryce Young's just completely abysmal. Guys still aren't open, and that is due in large to the scheme that is put in place by the current coaching staff.
Yeah, and you kind of think back to last year, right, where Bryce sometimes would make the plays, but the receivers would just drop it, or the O-line just wouldn't hold up. Well, this year, the O-line is holding up. I think it's like the lone bright spot on our team, but the quarterback has regressed. The receivers, while they still aren't getting a lot of separation, so to speak, they're open on some plays, and he's just missing them there. And I think this is all compounded with still subpar play calling. I think we can agree from Dave Canales. Now, he's the first-time head coach, but he has called plays before, at least last year. So just a lot of it's a tumultuous time for the Panthers, especially on offense. When you bring in these guys with the offensive line to try to help, it's just not working out right now. And I understand benching Bryce from the standpoint of you need to see if the offense can work with a different quarterback, like maybe an experienced veteran who isn't jittery right now. Like you can see Bryce jumping around in the pocket. It's not good stuff at all. I don't want to exonerate Bryce whatsoever. But I benching him this early screams like a David Tepper decision to me. And we're about to get into a pretty substantial David Tepper rant here. So I'll let you start, being as how you're his biggest fan.
Well, before we get into David Tepper, I want to kind of get more in the play calling. And we didn't see really any play action, bootlegs, rollouts until the second half. And that was the opening drive. We had a nice little 12-yard game to Tommy Tremble. And the ensuing drive, Bryce Young misses Deontay Johnson in kind of like a corner route, similar to what we saw in week one when he missed Deontay Johnson then, and Adam Thielen on a similar kind of route design or area of the field, so to speak. And just seeing those misses and not seeing enough of those installs, yes, some of that goes on Bryce, some of that goes on the coaching staff. And for me, I want to see more of those quote unquote easy buttons, as I like to call them, when you're using motion before the snap, when you're using play action and you're using screens the smart way. Because when you have a guy like Xavier Legette and Jonathan Mingo, as big as they are, you should have them as like lead blockers and Ike Ekwonu kicking out and allow a guy like Deontay Johnson to make a play with the ball in his hands. Feed your number one guy, and we just aren't seeing that in this offense, and it's very frustrating. Now, where it goes to David Tepper is that Dave Canales game goes, Bryce Young's our quarterback. He gets brought in because of his work with Baker Mayfield and Geno Smith, who, by the way, are still very successful without Dave Canales. And he gets plopped into this offense. And like you said, Bryce Young looks jittery. His footwork looks abysmal. And that was one thing that Canales said he was working on a lot this offseason with Bryce Young in terms of timing and working his feet and his eyes together. And we're not seeing that. This isn't the quarterback guru that he was hired to be. And sure enough, what we're seeing with Canales is Bryce Young looks skittish now. He didn't look skittish with Frank Reich and Thomas Brown, and we have plenty of issues, have aired our grievances about those coaches on that coaching staff last year. And guess what? Bryce Young was pushing the ball downfield in those games. I mean, you go back to the Jacksonville Jaguars game, worst losses last year, and it was DJ Chark dropping pass after pass. It had nothing to do with what Bryce was necessarily doing, and that's why we thought when we added a better infrastructure that he would perform better, and he hasn't. So in my opinion, Dave Canales is not the quarterback whisperer that people think he is, and he has actually been a detriment to Bryce's development. And that's just like when you look at the last couple games of last year and the first couple of games this year, I see a massive disconnect. Obviously, the efficiency is similar, but like in terms of processing, in terms of just confidence in the offense, it's not there.
Yeah, and while he has the same tendencies as Reich and Thomas Brown not to throw in those easy button kind of things like that, but you're certainly correct there. It reminds me of, and this is kind of an older NBA analogy, 2017, I believe, is when the Philadelphia 76ers drafted Markelle Fultz first overall over Lonzo Ball over Jason Tatum. And after he got hurt there, they brought in a guy and deconstructed his jump shot. And after that, his jump shot was just horrible. He couldn't shoot the ball at all. It wasn't as bad as Ben Simmons, but like he just couldn't shoot the ball from distance. Even on pull-up jumpers, he had to really wind up and get in there. And this is coming off of a guy at Washington, like University of Washington, Markel Fultz, who was an excellent pull-up jump shooter, excellent three-point shooter. He 100% deserved to go over those guys in the draft, and they brought in someone, deconstructed him. It reminds me of Bryce, what they're doing to Bryce Young. Like you talked about, the results of the Jags game, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers game, might be similar to the first two games this year, but like you're saying, Bryce wasn't afraid to throw the ball downfield. The Jags game, all the chark drops, the Buccaneers game, I think of the little
fumble
rollout,
into the end zone.
yeah, which eerily similar to the Mingo one 2 weeks ago, but still, even the Saints game, I thought he was getting up in the pocket, but he was just missing the throws. Like he was navigating, but just missing. And then even the Chargers game, he took a step back from even that. And when you're this quarterback guru and everybody's giving him praise for making the tough decision to bench Young and have Andy Dalton start, why aren't we getting mad at him for not developing Bryce at all throughout the offseason? If the goal was to tear him down to build him back up into a functional quarterback, fine. But getting rid of some of the stuff that was his strength in the draft, what he was able to do last year, even though it might not have resulted in wins, like navigating, processing, making plays off structure, and now he's not able to do any of that remotely well, you kind of have to start to question Canales. And he's just like the most recent string in the David Tepper, I guess the misadventures of David Tepper, because as of the Jets win this past Sunday, Tepper is now the losing, I guess the term is losingest owner since he took over. He has the worst record. The Panthers are 31-70 since he took over, just barely over 300, which is just horrible. And it all starts with him, right? It starts with getting rid of Cam Newton, which I think we can agree was a lot of his decision, right? He wanted Rule to have his infrastructure when he brought him in. By the way, hired Matt Rule, who had 1 year of NFL experience as an assistant offensive line coach. He was this program builder. They said Rome wouldn't be built in a day. Well, you can Rule 2 seasons and 5 games into that one. You hire Scott Fitterer while Rule's there. Rule hires him, and Scott Fitterer, who was the director of college scouting for the Seahawks when they were terrible at drafting. You remember that Seahawks run where they were drafting bust after bust in the first round, and people were like, these guys are like 70th on the consensus board. They're taking him 20th. That was when Fitterer was there in charge of scouting. He was horrible here. You want to look at a problem with the team and no homegrown talent, look no further than Scott Fitterer. And then when Fitterer was here, he hires Frank Reich, who, after he got canned in Indy, the team got exponentially better in the same season. And that just goes to show you that maybe he was the problem. Reich and Thomas Brown and the amalgamation of football minds, clash heads, they install I think it was David Newton reported this, 3 separate offenses in the offseason. So no wonder Bryce was set up to fail his rookie year. Bryce, they trade the house for Bryce. This is after trading for Sam Darnold, for Matt Corral, for Baker Mayfield. These were all trade ups that they did. And they signed Teddy Bridgewater, but didn't draft a QB there. And then you look at Justin Fields, who was there with that pick. He looks fine with a guy like Mike Tomlin, like getting to him. You know, Mike Tomlin's a good locker room guy. He knows how to get the most out of people. He looks fine now. The Steelers are 2-0. You do all of this, finally trade up for Bryce Young. You trade the house for him. You send DJ Moore away. You send all these picks away, which, by the way, we do have to send Chicago our second round this year. It's going to be pick 33, the way things are looking. The way the Rams are playing, hopefully we get a high pick from them, but it's going to be the 33rd pick. You don't send Burns in that deal, and then you turn down 2 picks for Burns. You trade away McCaffrey, trade away DJ Moore, then you trade away Burns for a second-round pick. All of this is leading to the state of the Panthers now, who probably have the worst roster in the league. Maybe like the Patriots have a worse roster. I don't know. But the Panthers are certainly up there. Certainly the worst defensive talent, especially with our only good player, Derek Brown, out for the season now. And you just kind of look back and see, how did all this happen? This was all David Tepper. Tepper, he's like a fan trying to be an owner, I guess. Like he wants to be one of the football guys. That's why he falls for people like Rule, who butter him up, for like Fitterer, who's just like him. It wasn't one of the things when he hired Rule that he was a fry cook, he had grease on his shirt, and that's what Tepper liked about him. Like, what does that have to do with building a football team or drafting football players or anything like that? I will say, to Rule's credit, our team now never looked as bad as it did under Rule, and granted, Rule had more talent, but at least they were prepared. This team looks unprepared. But with Rule, Reich, and now Canales, it's just string after string of David Tepper making the wrong decision. And like, I'm scared now that they're going to trade Bryce away at the deadline to like the Dolphins or something, where Mike McDaniel is going to turn him into a playoff QB. That's how it's looking for Darnold and Baker Mayfield, by the way. And then we're going to get stuck with the first pick, and Tepper's going to want to trade, or not trade, excuse me. He's going to want to draft a QB in this bum QB class. And like, I'll say it now, if you're afraid to not take a QB, let me own the team for a day and make the decision for you to trade back from one. Do what the Bears did to us, and then build an actual team, and then go get a QB when Arch Manning's in the draft, when Nico Ayamalieva, he has a tough last name to say, Tennessee QB, balling when he's in the draft. When Dylan Raiola, the Patrick Mahomes, the guy who dresses up like Patrick Mahomes for Nebraska, Matt Rule team, by the way, they're 3-0. Let those guys be the guy of the future, and don't try to rush things. You said Rome isn't built in a day. You want to preach patience, but you practice just doing everything right now because you're embarrassed by it. Be a good owner. Take a step back. Let the football people do the football thing, and just let this thing happen. I think, by the way, even though Canales isn't doing a great job right now, firing Dan Morgan and Canales in year one or after year one will be another misstep for this team.
Well, I'm going to get into the firing of Dan Morgan and Dave Canales here in a little bit, because I think there is a threshold that they need to hit, and Andy Dalton is going to prove whether or not that they're at that threshold. But when you look at this team, exactly like what you said, when Tepper bought it, all the homegrown talent that we drafted, Christian McCaffrey, DJ Moore, Brian Burns.
First-round picks.
Absolutely.
That all hit. That all hit, too.
And Marty Herney was the guy for most of that. I think Dave Gettleman might have drafted Christian McCaffrey in 2017. But when you start looking at how some of those pieces were brought in, and the fact that you had Christian McCaffrey extended, and for running backs and the way we were using him and how burnout he was in our offense, I completely got trading him away. We got more assets than I think we would have gotten production from him had he stayed in Carolina. But you trade a number one wide receiver in DJ Moore, who was signed to a great contract. You turn down 2 firsts from Los Angeles, and you don't immediately turn around and sign Burns. You could have gotten him for $25 million a year then. Last offseason, right before the season when he was holding out, we could have paid him $27, $28 million, less than what he got with the Giants, and still had him on the roster. Now, granted, is he a top 10 edge rusher? Probably not, but he was really good for us, and he helped the defense. And it goes to show that just all of this stuff snowballs. We have no talent now. We have literally given all our assets away to where we don't have a lot of draft resources. When you look from a cap standpoint, in terms of reserve lists, we lead the league in annual salary on the reserve list. Now, a large portion of that is Derek Brown, but we have other guys like DJ Wanham, Jonathan Brooks, these guys that are still coming back from injury. So we have a lot of guys injured, and then we're 9th in dead cap this year. We do not have a lot of flexibility to rebuild this from the ground up. And we do, like you said, have to take the time and treat this now like Rome, where it's not built in a day, where it is going to take several off seasons, where you have to do the smart thing and not rush it. Because if we rush this process, bad things are going to happen. Now, what I will say, that if Dan Morgan and Dave Canales continue to look worse than Reich's regime last year, like, why are they still in the building? Like, we had a threshold that was not acceptable play. And you go and look at a team like the Houston Texans, they weren't happy with Bill O'Brien. They fire him. The next year, David Culley sucks. They fire him. The next year after that, they have Lovie Smith, the internal hire, very similar to Dan Morgan, fire him. Then they hire D'Amico Ryans. Then they draft CJ Stroud. Then they move up for Will Anderson. And the rest of their franchise looks different. I think who you have in the building at the front of the office really matters. And if Dave Canales and Dan Morgan can't prove that they can put at least a couple wins together in a season coming off from a 2-15 year, and if they get worse from that, no, they need to go and we need to find winners and actually build a culture, because Canales isn't building the culture here then. Like, there is, like, when you say, and I'm going to bring this up right here while we're on it, Dave Canales said in the offseason, he said, I'm excited about proving to you how stubborn I can be with running the running game. Currently, we rank, I believe, 30th in rush attempts we're tied for. We are one of the worst from an efficiency standpoint running the ball, and it's not even close. So if you're watching this on YouTube, we are at the bottom left quadrant team that we are playing this week in the Las Vegas Raiders, who do not have a good running back or running game. And our offensive line is solid. Why aren't we running the ball when Bryce Young is struggling? Why aren't we toting the ball when we're only down a possession or two against the Chargers? I don't know. Like, Canales is saying he's going to do one thing, and he's not even doing that. Like, it is frustrating that you can't have transparency, honesty, and integrity from that position. And if you can't, then I don't think he should be here.
And especially, like you said, when Bryce is struggling, even in a close game with the Chargers, and Chuba Hubbard is playing very well, like run him until his legs fall off, I guess. I don't know. He's in a contract year too. You need to be using him over and over. They just aren't. My point about Dan Morgan is I actually once Jonathan Brooks comes back, once DJ Wanham comes back, we'll see more. But I think his additions with the O-line have been good so far. Granted, we had to pay a good bit for him, but the O-line's been solid. Once we see more from the draft picks, I think we'll be able to decide more there. They just aren't playing Leggett enough, I don't think, or not giving him enough touches. And then Jonathan Brooks, so we'll see. Jatavian Sanders was a day 3 pick, so not expecting much there. And Trevin Wallace, we'll see as well. Josie Jewell is getting washed out in the run game, by the way. I'd love to see Trevin Wallace get some snaps there, but we will have to see. I'm lukewarm, I guess, on Dan Morgan's offseason additions, but Canales for sure. My only hesitancy is Tepper's gotten in this cycle of like recycling coaches and GMs like very soon when they're not able to kind of build what their vision is for a team. The only one who got the chance was Rule, and he didn't have a GM his first year. So it's been kind of hectic from there. That's like my only hesitation there. But I definitely see what you're saying with the Texans example. And I think it helps when the Texans get both the quarterback and an edge rusher correct in a draft.
Yeah, I mean, that helps. But what I will say, when we had Mike Kay on Purrfect Takes a couple of weeks ago, he stated the whole reason why Dan Morgan got brought in internally, the whole reason why they brought in Dave Canales from Tampa Bay was because they believed that Bryce Young was the guy. If he is benched going the week 3, then that vision is out the window. Like that is gone. That is no more. So if that was the whole reason why those two are in the building, they have to prove that the rest of the team can work, because you mortgaged this whole offseason about building the offense to where it could be competent around that guy you took number 1 overall. And if that doesn't work, then why are you here? And that's what they have to prove in the next few weeks. I thought it would have been smart to keep Bryce Young in 4 to 6 weeks and really let that play out and then put in the backups and see, okay, we have a base floor, and Bryce Young was just really lowering it.
Yeah, and to that point, that makes me think that this is a major Tepper decision, right? Because even 2 weeks in, like you're not a full team, I think, especially on offense, until like the quarter mark of the season. Bill Belichick has said that numerous times, that's when you hit your stride. That's when you learn who you are. If you're willing to abandon it 2 weeks in, like or I guess 3 weeks in, like you're saying, it's just not a good look from an organizational standpoint. Number one, the media has been tearing the Panthers and Tepper the past 24 hours since we learned that Bryce is getting benched this week. And it makes sense, right? You do all this stuff like you're talking about to see if Bryce is the guy, and you're abandoning it 2 weeks in, especially when, and Bryce has been awful. I'm not going to hide it, but to me, the biggest issue with this team is still the defense, which is allowing half a yard, this much away from 200 yards per game rushing. Like the whole team is bad. So if you're going to abandon one aspect or one side of it 2 weeks in, it's just a bad look. And I know players are playing for their jobs. Coaches coach for their jobs. We need to see if the offense can work, but pulling the rug this early, I don't know. It's perplexing to say the least. And like I said, I wouldn't be surprised if Bryce ends up on the Rams or in a Shanahan McVay system and starts cooking. And we look like fools again because Baker Mayfield's doing it. Sam Darnold's doing it.
Yeah, and I think they were adequate quarterbacks in our system. I mean, Wilkes
Baker was bad. Baker was bad for sure, but Darnold was adequate when we ran the ball. And that's another point I want to bring up. When Wilkes took over and Darnold was clearly struggling from the previous year, and when he had to spell, I think it was after the PJ Walker Rams game when he had to spell him there, he was struggling. They started getting 7 people up front. They brought out the Arby's We Have the Meats package and ran the ball. Why don't we do that now when we have a
We're in empty all the
O-line?
time, dude. We're in empty all the stinking time because it worked with Baker last year. He's a great quarterback out of empty. But when you talk about a quarterback,
they have the receivers for it too. They have a Hall of Famer to operate with that too.
Yeah.
Props to Adam Thielen's career from going undrafted to 15 years now, but he is not Mike Evans.
No, and Deontay Johnson, as great a separator would be more comparable to a Chris Godwin in that offense. And I get why you drafted Xavier Leggett. He has the potential to potentially be a guy of Mike Evans, DK Metcalf's caliber on the outside, but he's not there yet day one. So you can't bank on that. And it's very frustrating for a guy that was supposed to tailor everything to the quarterback seems to be like a system guy where it's like, you play my system and that's it. And it's just
and what system is it? He's not running the ball. Like you said,
it's very frustrating. Now, this is what I saw when we hired Dave Canales. I was not a big fan of him. The play caller rankings that I do weren't very high on him, but I think this is a good transition point because while I can definitely pin my hat or hang my hat on the fact that I was right on Canales, or so it seems through 2 weeks, I have not been right about Shane Waldron in Chicago. I thought they would hit the ground running. They have the talent on the perimeter. Caleb Williams looked very exciting in the preseason. Everything that we saw in college of these big splash plays and him kind of orchestrating order and structure out of chaos. And that just hasn't been the case. Now, granted, the Titans and the Texans, I think, are two of the better defenses in the NFL, and that'll play itself out throughout the year. And maybe they go up from here. But we haven't seen a lot of easy talking about that I wanted to see from Canales. We haven't seen a lot of motion, a lot of play action. And I think that hurts an offense when you can't allow the quarterback to get off platform and either have the ability to just scramble and gain yards that way or find a wide receiver downfield. So hopefully that kind of turns around. I know it hasn't looked great for them, but their defense is really good under Matt Eberflus, and that's keeping them in game. So if they're able to start piecing this together, Rome Odunze kind of gets healthy again. Keenan Allen looks like Keenan Allen we've seen the past couple of years. I think this offense can work. I think a lot of their issues this year will come from the offense. And what we saw in Seattle from Waldron is that when tackles went down, he was able to use tight ends to kind of mitigate the edge rush. Well, when you have interior pressure coming because of how just I wouldn't say not talented, but these aren't really like above average players for the interior of the Chicago Bears. I think Nate Davis is on there, a few other guys where it's just you're mediocre dudes. You got to find ways to use tight ends, either in motion or the running back, to help block the interior and allow your stalwart tackles to kind of protect Caleb Williams that way. So I'm looking at protection schemes. I'm looking at how Shane Waldron can draw up easier plays in the coming weeks. And if he doesn't do that, I think a lot of Bears fans are right in calling for his head and that he's no better than Luke Getsy was last year.
Yeah. To preface this offseason, when Caleb Williams was drafted number 1, we said, we as in like football media, football people, this is the best, this is the best scenario ever for a number 1 pick QB. If not ever, it's probably second, right? He has at least a serviceable O-line. They signed DeAndre Swift like 2 minutes after free agency starts. They trade for Keenan Allen. They already have DJ Moore, who was excellent, who was vocal about wanting to keep Justin Fields there. They draft Rome Odunze, excellent receiver, 9th overall. They bring in Gerald Everett, too, I believe. They had Cole Kmet, who's pretty good. The offense was there, and so far it just hasn't materialized. The run game has been terrible, I think. I think they do need to get Khalil Herbert more involved. I thought he was actually quite decent in the second half versus the Texans. But it's just not there. And Caleb Williams, he is a rookie. Not all rookie QBs are going to look good. When we came into the season, I said it's going to be really hard for him to replicate Stroud's performance. It's like a top 5 rookie QB performance ever. And I thought that a lot of people had expectations of that. And it just wasn't going to happen. But so far, and I believe I saw this yesterday, the Panthers have more explosive plays on offense than the Bears.
Yep.
And I can only think of one, like the Mingo one where Bryce rolled out to the left and found him. That's the only one I can think of that was an explosive for us. And so the only thing less than 1 is 0. That's not very good, especially in an offense where it has the personnel, where it was heralded as being a really good situation for him. I've already started to see the narrative saying, oh, do they not have enough for Caleb Williams? Don't do that. We know how like strong the personnel is here. To me, it just comes up to the scheme. And as far as like we're trying to rename the segment from Coach Talk to something else, and you had the idea of like the Shaq meme. I wasn't familiar with your game. I owe you an apology. For Shane Waldron, it's you stink. You owe me an apology.
Yeah.
And so far, that's just how it's been. Hopefully, they get it turned around because they've invested there. The defense, like you said, is playing great. It's kept them in games. It won them the game week 1 versus the Titans. They didn't score on offense. It was all the defense and special teams. So as long as they can play at that level, if the offense picks it up, this could be like a sneaky wild card team. But yeah, the protection needs to be better. The run game needs to be better.
Yeah, and that's all going to help when you're able to marry the run and pass together, when you get Caleb Williams playing within rhythm and structure. So he's not having to backpedal against 4 or 5 man fronts that are coming after him. He had a play against the Texans where it was unfortunate. Like we saw him make these plays against Arizona State and some of these just weaker college teams, but you can't do that against grown professional men. Like these are big dudes that play extremely fast and will get after you. And I think Caleb Williams is starting to figure that out. And if him and Waldron can get on the same page, hopefully it clicks. Otherwise, Jackson Smith and Jigba kind of foreshadowed who Waldron really was. I believe it was right around the Super Bowl when everybody was kind of doing some interviews leading up to that big game.
To that point, like looking at his route chart, JSN's, he's being used like in multiple ways in the new Ryan Grubb offense there in Seattle. Yeah. So looking for Shane Waldron to spice it up a bit. I wasn't familiar with this guy's game. You were when we talked about this game before we played them. Clint Kubiak has been cooking with the Saints, particularly like focusing on the weaknesses of Waldron. That's where Kubiak's at his strength. The run game has been phenomenal for the Saints. Their O-line, which is bad, has mitigated pressure for Derek Carr, who, when he has a clean pocket, doesn't make mistakes. Their offense has been humming both week 1 and week 2. Week 1, it's the Panthers. They stink. Week 2, it's the Cowboys. And the Cowboys in Dallas. And it looked like that playoff game that ended the Cowboys season last season. I don't know if Mike Zimmer was an upgrade, but he wasn't necessarily a huge downgrade from Dan Quinn. And they didn't lose too much personnel. But when you look at those wide fronts that Zimmer's deploying, where he has like the edge rushers with like, or not edge rushers, D-line, excuse me, like 3 yards apart, like he's doing 2 wide 9s and 2 3-techs, you're going to get gashed in the run game. And so far, that's come true. And you got to give credit to Clint Kubiak. He's using Taysom Hill in creative ways. He's using Taysom Hill more creatively than Sean Payton ever did. And the run game's just phenomenal with them so far. And not just the run game, Rashid Shaheed is hauling in deep pass after deep pass. We've seen him do this throughout his career, but it was more like, all right, you get one of these every couple of games. He's doing it multiple times every game now. The Saints offense is just looking really good. I was certainly wrong about them being one of the worst teams. I think Kubiak's revived this team, and if this keeps up, he's not going to be there very long. He's going to be the next because I believe he was a Shanahan guy. He's going to be the next Shanahan head coach. By the way, they have another Kubiak on the Niners staff I saw today. Clay Kubiak is their passing game coordinator. So the tree just keeps going with them.
So what's very interesting, and this is just a brief historical thing, Kyle Shanahan initially got his start with Matt LaFleur. I don't know if Sean McVay, I think he met up with them in Washington. But Kyle Shanahan got his start initially with Gary Kubiak with the Houston Texans. And so then he has Gary Kubiak's sons kind of coach underneath him. And so you wonder if like, okay, maybe the Kubiaks have some of Kyle Shanahan's kids coach underneath them. And it's just like this whole cycle of Shanahan and Kubiaks pumping out prospects after prospects from a coaching standpoint. So that's really cool. What Clint Kubiak's been able to do is exactly what we've seen Shanahan style offenses or those offensive minds do. And they're able to mitigate a poor offensive line. I mean, you look at San Francisco outside of Trent Williams, not a great offensive line. You look at Miami outside of Tehran. No, is it Tehran offset? Yeah, because Laramie Tunsil is now in Houston. And again, go slow. You have like these elite tackles on your outside, and Taliz Fuaga, the first-round pick, is looking really good. And outside of that, you're able to mitigate kind of the offensive line based on some of these zone running schemes because you have these guys out moving in space, getting up to the second level. And offensive linemen love that stuff. They love being able to be physical at the point of attack. That's what gets them going. So then that opens up the passing game. And when you have speed and Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed, I mean, Clint Kubiak is in his bag. And what this tells me about the Cowboys is that they are not ready to go up against Shanahan-style offenses in the NFC or just the NFL in its entirety. They learned nothing from last year. They're getting gashed because they can't get big and physical like these teams are able to. And so why I don't think the Saints lean into 21 personnel as much as we see Mike McDaniel or Kyle Shanahan do. They're able to use 12 and 13 personnel and use those tight ends as an extra blocker or get bigger and more physical at the point of attack to where it opens up what we see them do week in and week out now from this standpoint. I mean, back-to-back 40-point games is absolutely insane. And it will be very interesting to see if any defense is able to slow this roll down because Carr looks phenomenal in this offense.
And before we get to like some of the games we wanted to touch on this week, I have a question for you because as we've seen so far, passing is like really down this year. Defenses are catching up. Do you think with defenses being geared more to stopping the pass, dropping more into coverage and stuff like that, look at Zimmer's deployment with the wide front. Do you think the running games are gonna gain more ground, so to speak, no pun intended, and that's going to be the strength of offenses moving, not the strength, but like the thing to lean on moving forward. And we're going to go back into the cycle of the run being strong, getting back into bringing one safety into the box, that sort of thing. Because, football is cyclical and it's been a passing league like the last, 6-7 years. Is it getting back to the run?
I want to say it is. And the reason why, and you brought up just the spacing Mike Zimmer had along the defensive line. Vic Fangio got gashed by the Falcons run game with Bijan Robinson in Philadelphia last night. And if you look at the spacing between Jordan Davis and Jalen Carter, you're just going, why? Like, I get that you're trying to set some things up where you can get after the quarterback, where you can make plays in the passing game. And obviously Vic Fangio is a big guy in terms of like, I want to drop 7, I want to drop 8 almost and just confuse the quarterback. But if you can't stop the run game, then you aren't going to be able to stop the opponent. And I think that's what Shanahan-style offenses are showing. I think that's what, because that's exactly where Zach Robinson comes from. He comes from Sean McVay, who loves running the ball over there. I mean, he rebuilt that whole offensive line, and that's really what I think propelled them to 10-7 in the playoff berth they had last year, which is being able to bully teams at the point of attack. And when you talk about the pendulum swinging in terms of efficiency, it is definitely heading in that way for rushing attacks. And I think if offenses don't adjust, then quarterbacks are just going to get stymied, and teams that are able to run the ball, Carolina Panthers should take note, are going to be kind of like front runners to win games because you're able to control the clock. You're able to just pretty much gain yards at will because teams don't have the ability from a personnel standpoint to stop you because their focus has been, okay, we got to stop a guy like Patrick Mahomes, a guy like Josh Allen, a guy like Joe Burrow that can hit these wide receivers on the perimeter that are going to be making these big plays.
Yeah, nothing would bring me more joy to get back to like 2008 Thunder and Lightning rushing attacks. Like that's prime football in my mind. Like thinking about like the early 2010 Alabama teams with like Mark Ingram, Trent Richardson, Derrick Henry. That's like prime football for me. So I hope we get back to that. We talked about like play callers in relation to Canales kind of stuff, kind of tangential there. The 2 games I want to talk about involve Sam Darnold and Baker Mayfield, both of whom look really, really good on their teams. Now, granted, Sam Darnold is in a Kevin O'Connell scheme. That's he's a McVay one, right? Not a Shanahan one. They're all connected, but I think he's from McVay. Looks really good there. Looks like an NFL starter. Certainly the best scheme that he's been a starter in. I know he was with the Niners last year. I guess it's a revenge game for them because they beat the Niners. That bomb to Jefferson was phenomenal. Like one of the better deep throws I've seen in recent memory. I think about the PJ Walker touchdown. That's what it reminded me of. And it was funny because the ref on that one, I think it was the back judge, outran the San Francisco safeties, toasted them, and then turned around and backpedaled into the end zone before they could try to make a play on Jefferson. Just really funny to me there. And the Vikings are really rolling. We talked about this when Tage was on there, and he was excited to say that his take was Darnold would play at least 10 games. And I believe he said top 18 in EPA. I'll have to go back and look at that after the episode. Yeah. But so far, he's definitely playing more than 10 games with the McCarthy injury. But he's up there in EPA to start the year so far.
No, he is. And I mean, Sam Darnold, he's obviously made some boneheaded decisions, should have had a couple more interceptions than I think he did in that San Francisco game. And that's just a part of Darnold's game. But when you have playmakers on the perimeter that the Vikings do, like that's a give and take. You can take a couple negative plays for the explosives that come with that. And so that's exciting to see. What's cool is the Vikings and the Buccaneers are 2 of 4 teams that are undefeated right now in the NFC. And that's pretty impressive. Like what we're seeing down in Tampa Bay, Liam Cohen's got that offensive humming. Todd Bowles doesn't look in a poor state in terms of the defense. They seem to be solid. Now, it will be interesting to see them against these other high-powered offenses across the league. But it is definitely something to take note of. I don't know when we look at the NFC North and even the NFC South that these two will end up winning the division, though. That is the only thing I'm going to be hesitant on. I think right now the Saints are in the driver's seat of the NFC South until proven otherwise. And when we look at the NFC North, I think the Lions are going to start putting this together. They obviously did not look. I almost want to say it's like, as much as you want to praise the Buccaneers for what they're doing, it felt like the Lions lost that game.
Yeah, it was a Goff moment.
Yeah, they ran like double the amount of plays. They were definitely moving the ball, but it was just like they would get into some of these situations where Goff would just throw to an area in the field and it'd get picked off because they knew where he was going with it. And so I think Ben Johnson and Goff need to kind of fix some of those things, make sure it's not just like, okay, I'm throwing in the field. I'm reading a guy and then making a decision. So I think that's definitely in their wheelhouse. I think the Lions will pull it together. What we saw the Packers do without Jordan Love is extremely impressive. So the Vikings still have a ways to go to show that they are the class of that division. But 2 weeks in, both of these teams deserve their props.
Yeah, and to the Buccaneers and Lions games point, I guess, the main thing I'm taking away from that, beside Baker looking good, he's probably played at a top 5, top 6-ish level so far. Jamison Williams is here. He was here in week 1, but especially in week 2, the way Ben Johnson's using him on end arounds, and he's actually running real routes. Like, we talk about how, I guess Canales wants to make Bryce into an NFL QB. They made J-Mo into an NFL receiver. Yeah. He looks really, really good. From a fantasy standpoint, he's super high up there for fantasy football players, but he's looking like the perfect complement to Amon-Ra St. Brown and Sam Laporta, and then not to mention Gibbs and Montgomery in the backfield. But I think if Goff can stay away from those errors, like play within himself more, this was in a dome, so it's surprising that Goff was like that. He's usually solid in domes, but if he can do what he's been doing with this Lions offense, I don't think they'll have any problems. I just wanted to point this game out because, like I said, Baker and Darnold are thriving in their situations, and I'm happy for him. Hopefully Bryce can get out of here and thrive wherever he needs to be, if that's not the play here. I don't think that they're benching him for the full year. I hope not. Like, if that's the play, then trade him already. But we'll have to see there. But those were like the 2 games I wanted to highlight this week. In terms of
before we get out of here, because Purdy has looked not to the MVP level that a lot of people were claiming last year. My question is he worth $60 million? Because that was the talk of it, and it's just he doesn't have Christian McCaffrey. Things aren't humming with a full offseason with everybody together, and you struggle.
And that was a little note that I had written down. Are they starting to show cracks now that McCaffrey's not there? Ayuk hasn't looked great to start this year. I think I saw today that Debo is going to be out for a couple of games now with a hamstring. Or it was a quad, I think, not a hamstring. So are the cracks starting to show? And Pearsall, I don't know if Pearsall is going to be back. Jawan Jennings, I'll say, has looked good, returning to the Niners on a 2-year deal. But yeah, I don't think any quarterback is worth $60 million. Let me be clear, except for Mahomes. But like, that's just the way it goes. Like, obviously, I think Dak has deserved what he's gotten with his new deal. But again, what has Dak done in terms of advancing that team in the postseason, stuff like that? Purdy for sure is not worth $60 million to me, and it's going to be really interesting to say the least what they're going to have to do, because they did give Trent Williams that reworked deal. They did extend Brandon Ayuk. They did give it was McCaffrey, right? They gave him the money, and Kittle's coming up here soon for an extension. Who are they going to get rid of? Who are they going to pay? They paid Bosa last year too after he held out. So like,
did you hear some of the rumors from the 49ers? So you have I think it's Jed York is their owner, but they have John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan, and those two were the ones who vouched for paying Ayuk, giving Trent Williams the money he wanted to. And the front office wasn't so sure on that. I'm sure they would have been okay pulling the trigger, but these two believe they were really a step away from winning the Super Bowl. Yep. And if you can't run it back, do they get canned in the next year or two? That would be my kind of take, is that like, if this falls apart, and it very well could, and you fall below 500, you don't make the playoffs, and you have all this cap locked up on a couple of these players and not a super bright future, I don't know, man.
All windows, I think, have to close unless you have a Mahomes, right? Or a Tom Brady, or even a Rodgers, even though stuff didn't work out there towards the end in Green Bay. Like, when you have someone of that caliber, you can always make the Super Bowl. You don't have someone of that caliber in Brock Purdy, right? Let's just be clear. He is a very good quarterback to run the Shanahan system. Outside of that, he hasn't shown much. In the playoffs versus Green Bay, I thought he finally showed something outside of that. But before that and since then, nada. So, like, to me, no on 60 million. Hey, if they want to give us a first for Bryce, let's go for it. I'm sure he'll be just as good there in the place of Purdy. But yeah, no, I'm not giving Purdy. I'm not touching Purdy above like 50 million. Like to me, let's just be honest, right?
If he wants a Derek Carr, a Daniel Jones, a Kirk Cousins deal, absolutely,
exactly.
He's worth that.
That's where I'm looking at with him, because when we want to go through, if we want to take the analytical, the EPA approach, you know who had high EPA when he was there? Jimmy Garoppolo. And what do we see? I don't even know what team I think he's on the Rams now. I think he's a backup for them. But like,
he's about to come off suspension. Yeah, I think he's activated for week 3. So we'll see if he gets any playing time and if he's able to kind of produce with McVay.
Well, and with all the offensive injuries there, who knows, right? Like we alluded to during that Panthers rant. Hopefully they take a monumentous slide and we get a good pick with their 2nd round pick. Best performances of the week to me were the rookie receivers. Obviously, Marvin Harrison Jr. finally hitting his stride, 4 catches for 130 yards, 2 touchdowns. He was everywhere. Brock Bowers actually leads the Raiders in targets through 2 weeks, ahead of Devontae Adams. 9 catches on 9 targets, so caught everything thrown his way for 98 yards. We're going to have to focus on him this week. And then Malik Neighbors, 10 catches on 18 targets. He's getting the ball thrown his way for 127 yards and a touchdown. Malik Neighbors leads the league in receptions 20 yards or more already 2 weeks into his young career. He has 5 of them already. The next closest guy has 3. I believe it's Rashid Shaheed. But yeah, really good rookie performances this past week.
What's interesting about the 3 receivers that you talked about is that I believe all 3 were top 10 for you. You had Marvin Harrison at 1, Brock Bowers at 2. Actually, let me correct myself. You had all 3 of those guys as top 5 prospects in this class. Harrison at 1, Bowers at 2, Neighbors at 4. And I think they are proving that they are number 1 dudes in their offense. And like you said, Brock Bowers has Devontae Adams on the outside, and he's cooking right now. And so that's cool to see. He's going to be a problem for our linebackers this week. Hopefully, like you said, Trevin Wallace gets some playing time over Josie Jewell, because that could be a very long day there. Neighbors, this dude, I mean, it was a reason why I targeted him in some fantasy drafts, but this is a guy that is going to elicit a massive target share just because he is so good with the ball in his hands and getting open, and to the point where he almost won him the game. He dropped a pass on a 4th down, and if they had a kicker, they probably would have just sent it to overtime or been able to make extra points to just win the game outright. But that's one of those things that, like, a rookie is putting his team in position to win a game, and that's exciting to see. Marvin Harrison, I mean, after a forgettable week 1 in terms of like statistics,
in terms of GPS numbers.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. If you want to go to numbers on that side, if you want to go to what he did as a wide receiver, wasn't great against Buffalo. But this week against the Rams, I mean, the seam catch was insane. Him reaching out for the 2nd touchdown. I mean, this guy is everything he was like pretty much made out to be. I mean, he is proving it. And Kyler looks like an MVP candidate. So Arizona's fun offense. That was somebody that you thought, or a team that you thought would really take that next step, and they're proving now. So before we get in the perfect takes, we're going to rehash kind of our takes from the prior week, see how we did. In the case of last week, I said the AFC South, all 4 teams would win. And you know what happens? 3 of the 4 teams lose. So the only team that actually won were the Texans. So I fell flat on my face with that one. And then I believe you said that the Panthers would have against the Chargers.
Yep, and they had 1. My finger in frame there. 1. The strip sack on Herbert. They had like 4 or 5 almost sacks, but then Herbert, like on the first drive, even he had the throw to the tight end, which was a fumble, by the way, but they didn't call it that. And then he had a couple more, but Herbert's like, we don't think about him as an athletic guy because like he's been kind of afraid to run in some of the early offenses he's been in and stuff like that. He's an athletic dude, and they used him to that effect. Gus Roman had him, not Gus Roman. It's Greg Roman, right?
Greg Roman, yes.
Greg
You're
Roman.
thinking Gus Edwards on the offense. Yeah, I had brain fart there
Greg
too.
Roman, he had him running like QB counter and stuff like that. So like he can move the ball. We forget that he's like 6'6", pretty strong guy. So they had him moving there. Only 1 sack, so hopefully we can do better this week, even though we just cut Eku Leota. But that's neither here nor there. This week, looking forward, I know we have Purrfect Takes written here, but let's get to the this upcoming Panthers game. So Andy Dalton's going to start. So we're going to see if the offense can function this week. That's going to be a big thing because so far haven't been able to do that. Haven't been able to stay on script, at least in the first game with we're talking about runs. We ran the ball 6 times other than QB scrambles that first game. That's not good if you want to prove how stubborn you are about running the ball. We need to get Chuba Hubbard involved. And talking about running the ball, Vegas allowed 152 rushing yards versus Baltimore. Now, do they have a really good running tandem in Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry? Yes, but they allowed 152 yards. This is something we need to take advantage of. Christian Wilkins has not been the run game solver that he was brought in to be. When you showed that rushing efficiency metric earlier, I know that was about offense, but the defense, their rushing defense is very similar. And to that point, their rushing offense is very bad too. And we faced, if you look at it, Alvin Kamara in the top right, and then I know the Chargers are kind of down there at the bottom, but they ran better than that graphic shows it. So what we need to do is run the ball and take care of the run because Zamir White and Alexander Madison are not very good. Last week, they rushed 17 times for 27 yards. They're the 3rd worst in the league in yards before contact. That means the defensive line gets to them and like stymies them, so to speak. We have allowed 399 yards, and the Chargers and the Saints are numbers 1 and 2 in yards before contact. We have been very bad at that. So this is a chance for us to man up and stop the run and make them throw the ball downfield. We see now how Brock Bowers has been involved. He's a good guy at running the seam. He can really do everything. But he's a good guy at running the seam, operating in the middle, and that really works off play action and things of that nature. If you can stop that, then maybe you have to force Gardner Minshew to make mistakes, which he's been prone to do, and throw beyond him. Throw beyond Devontae Adams' story. He has to work to Jacoby Myers, Trey Tucker, Michael Mayer. Get him to throw to those kind of guys, and maybe we can get a win there. J.C. Horn also, I think, to his credit, he forced the turnovers, but you can't let Quentin Johnston score, and he's going to have a tougher matchup this week with Devontae Adams. So this is as favorable a matchup, I think, as we'll get maybe throughout the whole season, certainly early in the year. And with a new QB galvanizing the team, getting them excited, this is a game we need to take advantage of.
Yeah, absolutely. I think forcing the offense to get kind of facilitate the tertiary options, force Minshew to not throw to Adams, to not throw to Bowers, to then, like you said, throw to your Jacoby Myers, your Michael Mayers, your Trey Tuckers of the world, and force those guys to beat you. Because I think the way to kind of bracket this is you have J.C. Horn on Devontae Adams. Depending on obviously the coverage, maybe you throw a safety over top just to make sure he doesn't get beat deep. But then it's really like you got to bracket off Brock Bowers. You got to have a linebacker underneath, the safety over top. And like I said, like you said, take away those 2 main options and force Minshew to beat you another way, because that might lead to mistakes, which could lead to turnovers, which could lead to the shorter fields for a new starting quarterback here in Carolina. So
I don't want to interrupt you super hard here, but last night on the Manning cast, when they had Bill Belichick on, he said exactly what you're saying right now. He said when they had Revis in New England, they put Revis on the number 2 receiver, they bracket the number 1 and make the 3rd, 4th, 5th receiver beat them. That is the key for this week. We need to listen to maybe the greatest defensive mind ever and take a note out of his playbook. That's what our defense has to do.
No, and I mean, if you look at the times that the Patriots won the Super Bowl, as much as people want to put it on Tom Brady, this, that, the third, most of the times when they won the Super Bowl, they had a top 10 defense. And the reason why they had a top 10 defense is they had a number 1 corner. So those early 2000 years, you have Ty Law. And then on some of those back years, you had guys like Darrelle Revis, like you said, or even Aqib Talib.
Stephon Gilmore,
Defensive Player of the Year. I think the last time a cornerback's won, every time usually it's been an edge. So when you have those guys that can shut down either that one or two guy and you can bracket the other guy, it really forces you to that third and fourth read. And that's what causes quarterbacks to hold on the ball a little bit longer, allow the defenders on the defensive line to get after the quarterback. So, I mean, this philosophy has worked for him. I think it can work for us in this scenario, and hopefully it does. For my perfect take this week, heading into week 3, I think, because I'm not a big fan of this Vic Fangio defense in Philadelphia. They travel to New Orleans on a short week, and I think Clint Kubiak is going to be in his bag. I think the Saints drop a third 40-plus piece in a row, and they win that game. And so as much as I love the Eagles, I think they're one of the better teams in the NFC. Until they fix some of the stuff on defense, until Vic Fangio is determined to stop the run, I think it's going to be a lot of long afternoons for this team, and they're going to be forced into a lot of shootouts because of it. So with that in mind, I think the only thing we have left is to break down kind of the preview for the Panthers. We already talked kind of defensive philosophy strategy with our perfect takes of how we would approach that. On offense, what are we going to see? Because we're going up against the defensive line that features Max Crosby and Christian Wilkins. The back end has playmakers like Jack Jones. And so to me, I'm curious how Andy Dalton and this offense is going to churn out enough offense to keep us in a game to where we might win.
And to that point, I think we need to look at two things. One, you need to look at my perfect take this week, which is Chuba Hubbard is going to run for 100 this week. I think magically Canales is going to be able to stick to his guns here. It's for like, all the trick plays are going to come out and stuff. But no, I think we're going to be stubborn with the run because, like I said, their run defense, despite adding a guy in Christian Wilkins, has not been good the first 2 weeks. So that's key number one. We need to take advantage of that. Get Chuba involved. Get Miles Sanders involved. Get even as long as Mingo tells me he'll hold on to the ball, get him and Xavier Legette on some of those end arounds, some jet sweeps, stuff like that. Get the running game going crazy. Bring in Brady Christensen as have him do what we did with Cade Mays during the Arby's package, right? Bring him in as a fullback because we don't really ever have a fullback, Tommy Tremble, I guess, but get extra blockers in there and road grade them. That's key number one for me. Number two is we got to look back at what Andy Dalton did versus Seattle, actually week 3 of last year. It's funny how that mirrors up there. Now, Seattle, they are missing 2 of their top, I think 3 or 4 secondary pieces in that game. So the the remade Legion of Boom wasn't there, but he had 59 dropbacks. He aired it out. So we know he has the arm to step in and throw the ball downfield. And other than Jack Jones, I know Trayvon Merrick is a solid mover at safety. I think he had an interception week 1. But we need to be able to test that secondary down the field because we know we have the offensive line to do it. Now we need to see is it the schemes that Canales is running, like the route combination, stuff like that. Despite how bad Bryce has been, the routes are not helping him. So we need to see, is that working? And if Andy Dalton can air it down the field, can these guys like Deontay Johnson, Xavier Legette take the ball to the house once they have the catch? I'm not going to say Adam Thielen because bless his heart, he's not housing anybody right now at his tender-old age there. And Jonathan Mingo, I don't think is a huge yak guy. I do think he'll be able to bounce with people when he has the ball in his hands. We saw that in the Houston game last year, but I don't think he's going to burn anyone downfield. So we need to run the ball and off of that, maybe build some play action. Make this a 2008 offense, and we'll see what we can do.
Yeah, I mean, I like the Cade Mays idea. I'd be okay doing 11, 12 personnel in a jumbo formation where you have a Tommy Tremble and a Cade Mays on the field on top of your 5 offensive linemen, and you dare them to load up, bring an offensive lineman, bring a linebacker, because if you can bully them that way and then build play action off that, I mean, sky's the limit, I think, for this offense, because you could have a couple deep shots to a guy like Deontay Johnson. You can lean into having a Thielen open or a Mingo open and allow them to make plays. Maybe Xavier Legette gets a one-on-one opportunity where he's able to go up and moss a guy in the red zone. And that would be huge. Those are the things that you want to build on as the season continues. And we haven't seen that yet. So hopefully a change at quarterback, it changes a couple things on the offense. They get a couple things going, and we see some improvement from that standpoint. My only concern is because of how stout their defensive line is, that a guy like Icky may get beat a couple of times.
Yeah.
We could have a couple of situations where they're able to get pressure only rushing 3 or 4, and that could put Andy Dalton in a precarious situation to where he's making mistakes like what we're talking about with trying to do with Minshew. So we'll see how it all plays out. I think it's very interesting kind of how it all looks based on these two teams struggling to stop the run, and that this could just be a ground and pound game on both sides where we only see a few drives and they're longer based on just teams being able to grind it out and burn the clock that way. So I think outside of talking about a couple bets this week, last week I unfortunately went 1-3-1. The only win I had was Buffalo. They obviously beat the Dolphins, shellacked them in Miami. Seattle was a push in New England. And then Indy took a shocking loss to Malik Willis and the Green Bay Packers. Kansas City obviously won, but didn't win by 6. And then the Eagles lost outright, so didn't cover versus the Falcons. So we'll have a couple of our bets, our pick'ems leading into the weekend. I know we haven't done that the first couple of weeks on Twitter, but we'll try to get back in the swing of things as we hit week 3. Is there anything that you want to say before we sign off?
Yeah, I took the easy way out and only did one on the pod last week, one bet, and Arizona certainly took care of business. So I'll hang my hat on that one. But I guess, yeah, we can post ours later in the week. The one I would look at is I think Chicago has a good chance to go into Indy and get the win. Chicago's played 2 stout defenses so far. I don't think Indy's defense is up to par, especially with DeForest Buckner going to be on IR that came out today, I believe. So I think this will be a good chance for Shane Waldron and for Caleb Williams to settle down and get stuff done, because Anthony Richardson has not looked super composed and going fully through the offense to start the year. So I think the Bears defense could turn them over, and I think the Bears could walk out with the win. So I would take the Bears outright as my my bet that I want to put out there this week.
Gotcha. One I'm leaning towards right now, just as we're wrapping up, I'm really shocked that the Patriots are +6.5 against the Jets. I know they're going to be in New York on a short week, but when we've seen how well the Patriots have played a few of these teams kind of out of the gate, I mean, beating the Bengals in Cincinnati, taking it down to the wire with the Seattle Seahawks. And these two teams, I think, are both playoff caliber teams. To have a team that got spanked in week 1 in San Francisco and barely eked it out against the Tennessee Titans on the road, I don't know if they're necessarily just going to win by a touchdown or more. So that is a spread line that I would kind of lean more towards the Patriots, just based on how Jared Mayo's got the team playing at the moment. I think that's about it. So we will catch you all next week. I will be out of town this entire week in Ohio, so coming back on a short week to kind of get you guys the week 3 recap will be our main goal next Tuesday. If you have any questions, shoot them to us at Purrfect. Okay, I'm going to redo that one. At
Purrfect underscore takes.
There you go. Follow us on Twitter, YouTube. Most of the socials we're on, and follow us for great content. So we'll see you guys next week.